The cursed campsite, a never-ending nightmare. It was a dark and stormy night when a group of high school students arrived at their campsite deep in the woods. The trip was supposed to be a fun adventure, but little did they know that they were about to experience a nightmare that they would never forget. As the students set up their tents and started a fire, they noticed that something was off about the place. The trees seemed to be leaning inwards, as if they were trying to envelop them. The wind howled through the branches, making eerie sounds that sent shivers down their spines. But they tried to brush it off and enjoy their evening by telling ghost stories around the campfire. As the night grew darker, one by one, the students started to disappear. At first, they thought they had just gone off to use the restroom or explore the area. But as time passed and they still didn't return, they began to worry. They searched the campsite, but found no trace of their missing friends. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods. They all jumped up, their hearts racing with fear. They tried to follow the sound, but it seemed to be coming from all directions. The darkness was so thick they could hardly see their hands in front of their faces. Then, they saw a figure in the distance, moving towards them. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with long, tangled hair that covered her face. She walked slowly, as if she was in pain, and her eyes glowed in the darkness. They were filled with anger and malice, and the students knew that they were in danger. They tried to run, but the woman was faster. She caught up to them in no time, and they could feel her breath on their necks. They turned around and saw that her face had changed. Her skin was peeling off, and her eyes had turned into empty sockets. She had a jagged scar that ran down the middle of her face, and her lips were twisted into a permanent snarl. The students screamed and ran as fast as they could, but the woman was always one step ahead of them. She seemed to know the woods better than they did, and she was always waiting for them around every corner. They tried to find their way back to the campsite, but it seemed like they were lost in a maze. As the night wore on, the students began to lose hope. They were exhausted and scared, and they knew that they were never going to make it out alive. They huddled together, praying for a miracle, but none came. Then, they saw a light in the distance. It was coming from a cabin that they had not seen before. They ran towards it, hoping that they could find shelter and safety. As they got closer, they could hear the sound of chanting and ritualistic drums. They hesitated, but they knew that they had no choice. They entered the cabin, and they saw a group of people dressed in black robes, gathered around a fire. They were chanting in a language that the students did not understand, and they seemed to be performing some kind of ritual. The students tried to back out, but the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. Then, the woman appeared. She stood at the head of the group, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. It was deep and guttural, and it filled the students with terror. She said that they had trespassed on sacred land, and that they would have to pay for their sins. The students tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. They were bound and gagged, and they could feel the cold, hard ground beneath them. They knew that they were about to become sacrificial offerings to the spirits that haunted the woods. The woman and her followers continued their chanting, and the air grew thick with the smell of burning incense. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the cabin, causing a massive explosion. The students were thrown clear, and they landed on the forest floor, bruised and battered but alive. They looked around and saw that the cabin was in ruins, and that the woman and her followers had disappeared. As they stumbled through the woods, they saw that the trees had stopped leaning inwards, and that the wind had died down. They felt as though a weight had been lifted from their shoulders, and they knew that they had survived a nightmarish ordeal. Eventually, they stumbled upon a group of park rangers who had been searching for them. They told them what had happened, but the rangers were skeptical. They said that there was no evidence of a cabin or a cult, and that the students must have been imagining things. The students never spoke of their experience again, but they knew that they had faced something evil that night. They had seen the darkness that lurked in the heart of the forest, and they knew that they would never be the same. From that day on, the campsite was avoided by all who knew its terrible secret, but the students who had survived would never forget the horror they had faced, and they would always wonder if the spirits of the woods were still watching, waiting for their next victims. Despite the rangers' disbelief, the students knew that what they had experienced was real. The memory of the woman with the scarred face and the chanting cult haunted their dreams, and they could still feel the cold, hard ground beneath them as they were bound and gagged. As time passed, strange things started happening to the survivors. They would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as though they were being watched. They would hear whispers in their ears, even when there was no one around. They would see shadows moving in the corner of their vision, but when they turned to look, there was nothing there. One by one, the survivors began to disappear. They would leave their homes in the middle of the night, without any explanation, and would never be heard from again. Their friends and family searched for them, but there was no trace of them. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The survivors who remained started to unravel. They stopped going to school, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. They would spend their days staring into space, their eyes vacant and hollow. They knew that they were next, and that there was no escape from the curse that had befallen them. One night, the last survivor received a message. It was a map, showing the location of the campsite. The survivor knew what it meant. They had to return to the place where it had all started, and face the darkness that awaited them. As the survivor made their way to the campsite, they could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on them. The trees leaned inwards once again, as if they were trying to swallow them whole. The wind howled through the branches, and the shadows danced in the darkness. When the survivor arrived at the campsite, they saw that the ruins of the cabin had been rebuilt. The woman with the scarred face stood at the entrance, waiting for them. She spoke in the same guttural voice as before, and told the survivor that they were the last one, and that the sacrifice was almost complete. The survivor tried to run, but they were caught by the cult members. They were bound and gagged, and placed on the cold, hard ground. The chanting began once again, and the air filled with the smell of burning incense. The survivor could feel their lives slipping away, and they knew that they were about to become another sacrifice to the spirits of the woods. But then, a bolt of lightning struck the cabin, causing it to collapse in on itself. The cult members were thrown clear, and the survivor was able to escape. As they stumbled through the woods, they saw the spirits of the dead rising up from the ground, their eyes glowing with anger and malice. The survivor knew that they had been saved by the spirits, but they also knew that they would never be the same. As the survivor emerged from the woods, they saw that the sun was rising. They knew that they had survived a nightmarish ordeal, but they also knew that they would never forget the horror that they had faced. They knew that the spirits of the woods were still watching, waiting for their next victims, and they knew that they would always be haunted by the memory of the cursed campsite. The survivor thought they had made it out of the woods alive, but the horror was not over yet. The spirits of the dead had followed them, and they could feel their cold breath on the back of their neck. The survivor started running, but the spirits were faster. They chased after them, their moans echoing through the woods. The survivor looked back and saw the spirits closing in on them. They were surrounded on all sides, and there was no escape. They knew that they were about to be dragged down to the depths of hell, where they would suffer for all eternity. Just as the spirits were about to grab them, a blinding light appeared in the sky. The survivor shielded their eyes, and when they opened them again, they saw a figure descending from the heavens. It was an angel, with wings of pure white and a sword of flame. The angel attacked the spirits, cutting them down with ease. The survivor could feel the power of the angel, and they knew that they had been saved once again. The spirits vanished into the ether, and the survivor collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. The angel approached the survivor and spoke in a voice that was both soothing and terrifying. They said that they had been sent to protect them, but that they must never return to the cursed campsite again. They said that the spirits of the dead would be waiting, and that they would not be as merciful next time. The survivor nodded, too frightened to speak. The angels spread their wings and rose up into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The survivor was left alone, trembling with fear and wondering if they had truly escaped the horrors of the woods. Years went by, and the survivor tried to forget the nightmare that had consumed their life. They went to therapy, took medication, and tried to live a normal life. But the memory of the cursed campsite haunted them, and they could never escape the feeling that the spirits were watching them. One day, the survivor received a message. It was a map, showing the location of the cursed campsite. The survivor knew that they should ignore it, but they couldn't resist the pull of the darkness. They returned to the campsite, hoping to confront their fears once and for all. But when they arrived, they saw that the spirits were waiting for them. They emerged from the ground, their eyes glowing with anger and malice. The survivor tried to run, but they were caught in a trap. The spirits dragged them down to the depths of hell, where they would suffer for all eternity. And as the survivor screamed in agony, they knew that they had made a fatal mistake. They had returned to the cursed campsite, and now they would pay the ultimate price for their curiosity. The spirits of the woods had claimed another victim, and they would continue to haunt the living for all eternity.